Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.
Welcome to the David Pakman Show. I'm Farron Cousins from Ring of Fire, sitting in for David today. We've got a lot to cover, so let's hop right into it. First and foremost, I want to start with where I am located, the state of Florida. As everybody knows right now, the state of Florida is watching as COVID absolutely ravages this state. To complicate matters, in just a couple days, next week, most school districts here in the state of Florida resume. Children going back to school, virtually no mask mandates in place, and that is thanks to an executive order signed by our Trump-loving Republican governor, Ron DeSantis. Just a couple weeks ago, DeSantis signed an executive order expressly forbidding school districts, counties, cities from putting any kind of mask mandate in place. And he followed that up, by the way, with a threat to strip federal funding, actually state funding, from any school that implements a mask mandate. At the same time that this is happening, Florida, just 2 days ago, had over 20,000 new COVID cases, the second highest day on record for us. We have had over 40,000 deaths in this state alone. The last week of July, we had more than 10,000 children test positive for COVID-19. Our ICUs are filling up with men, women, and children as well. And DeSantis is sending everybody back to school and expressly saying you cannot implement policies to protect these children. That is what we are dealing with here in the state of Florida. There's a little bit of hope, though. Right now, we have several counties that have decided to fight back. Orange County, which is the big area of Orlando, it's where the theme parks are, huge population there. They decided, along with Broward County down in South Florida, another huge, huge county, that they were going to defy DeSantis. And they decided to go ahead and put the mask mandates in place for school children. Now, this was actually before DeSantis signed his executive order, but after his threat of do not, put a mask mandate in place. So then, after he signs the order, threatens to strip the funding, Broward said, well, okay, hold up. We're going to rescind the mask mandate. We're not going to do it now. We're not going to go along with it. And then something amazing happened. Several other counties, Leon County, which is where Tallahassee, our capital, is, they said, we're going to do masks for children, at least for a couple weeks. Alachua County said, you know what? We're going to do the same thing. Orange County, of course, was doing it. Then after everybody else jumped in, Broward County came back and said, oh, you know what? We are going to put our mask mandates in place to protect our children as they go to school. Other school districts are currently, actually today, having meetings about whether or not to put mandates in place to protect, I think it's usually about K through 8 children by putting mask mandates in place. Obviously, if they hit 12 years old, they're eligible for the vaccine. But that's of little comfort to parents who have children basically 6th grade or younger at this point. So what's happening now is they're essentially daring the governor, saying, we're putting these mandates in place. We're going to protect these kids. You've told us you're going to strip our funding. What are you going to do about it? Basically playing a game of chicken with this little wannabe Florida dictator, and I love it. I love it not just because of the political stance that they're taking, trying to say you cannot, have ultimate authority over every single aspect of this state. There are certain things that as a school board, as a county, we can do to protect our residents. But most importantly, because the legal showdown, that if DeSantis chooses to enforce any of his, rules, this thing is going to go to court. And there, it's a mixed bag. Especially down here in Florida courts, we have seen some horrible decision come from some ridiculously right-wing packed courts. So it's likely they could side with Governor DeSantis. It's also just as likely that in the interest of the public's health, safety, and welfare, they could say that no, the counties are exercising their authority to protect their residents. Again, because of the makeup of the courts, not just here, but on the appellate level as well, it's a mixed bag, and we really can't predict or even pretend to know what kind of decision we would actually get from any of these courts. But we can hope. And I think right now, that's probably the best we have. Because here's what's happening. The public is actually starting to, in small ways, turn on Ron DeSantis, who, as we all know, is essentially at this point the heir apparent to Donald Trump's political apparatus should Donald Trump not run for president again in 2024. DeSantis has been rising in those nationwide Republican polls. But over the past couple weeks, the polls down here in Florida are telling us a much different story. As it stands right now, and granted, I'll give you this, there's one poll where DeSantis is now losing to Democratic rival Charlie Crist, who actually used to be our Republican governor. Now he says he's a Democrat. But anyway, he's beating Ron DeSantis by 1 point in the latest poll. 45% Crist, 44% DeSantis. And the poll, of course, has a 1.6% margin of error. And we're still 15 months out from the actual election, so the poll doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot. But it is showing us that at least some people here in the state are paying attention. They're watching as we have days where we literally have tens of thousands of people coming down with COVID, where we send thousands more to the hospital because of this. Children are being hospitalized at an alarming rate here in the state of Florida, and DeSantis would rather make this into a political issue than a public health issue. Earlier this week, he got into a bit of a tiff, I guess you'd call it, with the White House because Joe Biden called him out, said, Florida, Texas, either do what you need to do or stay out of our way so we can do what we need to do to protect people. And DeSantis fired back at a press conference, said, I'm going to stand in the way all the way. Well, that means putting our kids in danger. Another story came out this week from Politico, where they talked to administrators, school board members, and principals from schools across Florida, and a lot of them told the same story. As I mentioned, schools starting in just 3 days at this point. Some of them don't have the staff to do it. Either because they've had to bury too many of them in recent months due to COVID, or because they have suffered massive outbreaks once teachers went back. Teachers always have that week of pre-planning. Everybody got exposed. So now you have schools that are going to start, some of them having teachers in the double digits out on quarantine. They don't have the staff to run their schools. One said, we're literally losing our workforce. That is the quote. Literally losing our workforce. And DeSantis won't let us protect our teachers or our kids. I'm hoping he backs off this, but honestly, I don't think he will. Because for him, this truly is a political statement. Has nothing to do with science, has nothing to do with the safety of people here in the state of Florida. It's all politics. And he is pandering to the worst of the worst. And if he wants a bit of a lesson in how that turns out, he needs to look over to the state of Arkansas. Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, a Republican, came out this week and admitted, oops, I shouldn't have signed a ban on mask mandates in my state now that COVID numbers are going through the roof again. I messed up, is the message that we got from Arkansas's Republican Governor Asa Hutchinson this week. Here's a couple quotes I want to read here. And this is what Hutchinson said. Well, I signed it at the time because our cases were at a very low point. I knew it'd be overridden by the legislature if I didn't sign it. I already eliminated our statewide mask mandate. I signed it for those reasons, that our cases were at a low point. Everything has changed now. And yes, in hindsight, I wish that had not become law. So, yeah, I did it. Oops. Wish I hadn't, but it's not like I'm in a position of power to do anything about it. You are, though. Okay. And hey, it's great that you've come around and realized you messed up. Too little, possibly too late at this point. He is, of course, now asking the legislature to at least overturn the part of the law that doesn't allow school districts to decide whether to put mask mandates in place. So at the very least, Asa Hutchinson is out there begging the Republican-controlled legislature, can you guys at least make it to where school districts get to make their own decisions about protecting the kids? But folks, this is what happens. This is why you can't have these reactionaries as leaders. They give in to the worst of their constituents. The people who say that masks are tyranny or that masks are somehow oppression. They're neither, by the way. But they signed this law to gain political points, both over in Arkansas, over here in Florida, because they think it's going to gain them some political points. And then boom, everything blows up. And their hands are essentially tied at this point. Now, over here in Florida, Ron DeSantis could come out and make the same kind of statements that Asa Hutchinson has. Because at least Hutchinson had the good sense to be like, whoa, folks, I messed up so bad. Of course, he wasn't that extreme with it. But DeSantis is over here watching again, as we just had a day where 20,000 people got diagnosed with COVID. I have family members in the hospital right now down in South Florida in the ICU. So this is a personal thing for me. It is a political thing for me. It does hit close to home for me. And DeSantis is doubling down, saying, yeah, Biden, I'm going to stand in your way. I am not going to comply. I am not going to listen to the CDC. I am not going to let anyone other than me decide what's best for the millions and millions of residents here in the state of Florida that, oh, by the way, are dropping dead because of my idiotic decisions. DeSantis' poll numbers have also taken a massive hit because of this. As I mentioned, the one poll, obviously, he's trailing his Democratic rival. That one will change, hopefully for the better. But his approval rating has now fallen to 43% as of this morning. Now, 43%, still not horrible. But when you consider the support that this guy had, he has dropped by double digits in just the last month. That's how extreme this is. That's how extreme he is. And the residents are waking up to it. And they're waking up to it every time another relative goes into the hospital. They're waking up to it every time they have to put another family member in the ground. It's terrifying and it's horrible that this is what it's taking some people to finally wake up and realize that sometimes you have to put the science over the politics. But people are starting to see exactly how dangerous DeSantis' policies truly are. He's not going to pull an Asa Hutchinson. He's not going to come out and say, I screwed up, I regret this. He's going to continue to double down because he thinks it's going to help him politically, even though the numbers show it's doing the exact opposite. I'm Farron Cousins, sitting in for David Pakman today. We'll be right back.
What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist, and what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. I am Farron Cousins from Ring of Fire, sitting in for David Pakman today. You can follow me on Twitter, by the way, at Farron Balanced. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram at Farron Balanced. I'm on YouTube, youtube.com/The Ring of Fire, and youtube.com/Farron Balanced. Now, we've got a bit of an issue here, right? If you've been paying attention to the news this week, you have no doubt seen a little bit of speculation about Marjorie Taylor Greene possibly running for president. And the reason these stories have been popping up throughout the week is because it was recently announced that Marjorie Taylor Greene, on August 19th, I believe it is about to make a trip to the Iowa State Fair. And for those of you who may not know the significance of the Iowa State Fair, you know how every primary season we get the photographs of candidates and they're chowing down on the big old corn dogs and meeting with people? Yeah, that's usually from the Iowa State Fair. This is essentially the launching ground of many presidential campaigns. They go to Iowa at this state fair, which is massive, to test the waters, to gauge the response of the individuals in attendance. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to go there. So it has prompted this speculation as to, oh my God, is she actually thinking of running for president? This person who's been in office for 8 months now, already been stripped of her committee assignments, and now she might be running for president? And to that I say, hold your horses, folks. Now, she may be running for president. I'll get to that in a minute. But let's not jump to those extreme conclusions just yet, okay? We know that for the last several months, Marjorie Taylor Greene has been touring the United States with Matt Gaetz. They've been going out, spewing election lies, attacking Democrats, attacking Republicans, attacking the deep state, attacking quite possibly anybody that they think is going to benefit them politically by attacking. We also know that in the recent weeks, they've kind of struggled to find venues, right? Got kicked out of 3 different places over in California recently, had to hold their little rally on a sidewalk with just a handful of people in attendance. So to me, the most likely explanation as to why Marjorie Taylor Greene would be heading to the Iowa State Fair is because it is essentially a captive audience. And she is incredibly less likely to be kicked out of it. So why not, right? Why not go there to this thing that everybody focuses on, especially in the world of politics? Why not go there and do your spiel in front of these individuals? Why not go out there and talk to them? It doesn't have to be a presidential run. It could just be something as simple as, oh boy, I have more people I can do my little spiel to. I feel like that's probably the most likely explanation. It is the simplest explanation. She struggled to find an audience, so this would be it. But let's look at the extreme side, okay? Let's assume for a second Marjorie Taylor Greene is actually, as they call it, testing the waters for a presidential run. Bring it on. Like, I am here all day for that. Marjorie Taylor Greene won her election in Georgia last year, running unopposed, getting 74% of the vote. Okay? She couldn't even crack a solid 3/4 of the vote when nobody was running against her from this tiny little Georgia district. A deep red, solid Republican district, and she couldn't even get 75%? Yikes! Not to mention the fact that she has made a spectacle of herself all across the country at this point. She's done it throughout all of her media appearances, all of her horrific tweets, her anti-Semitic tweets. So if she wants to run for president, go for it. I seriously doubt you have any chance whatsoever of being successful with it. I do not believe for a second that she could end up being, the kind of dark horse person like Donald Trump became, going out and basically telling the people what they wanted to hear to the point where they somehow decided to vote for him. I don't think she has that potential because she absolutely does not have that kind of charisma, that odd charm that kind of sucks people in. She's just a train wreck. And I don't think she would have any chance whatsoever. All she would do in a presidential primary is just drag down the overall image of the Republican Party. So like I said, I'm here all day for it. I hope she is going to Iowa to test the waters for a presidential run. But I also truly don't believe that that's what she's actually doing. And speaking of elections, let's take a look at what's happening in Arizona, right? There have been all kinds of revelations from the state of Arizona this week with the ongoing ballot audit that began in April. Now in its 5th month, everything is a total secret. But earlier this week, actually on Monday, a magistrate judge in Arizona said, hey, Republicans, actually Karen Fann, Arizona Republican Senate President, you have to turn over all of the documents, all of the communications that you have about this ongoing ballot audit to the groups who have sued, one of them being the media outlet Arizona Republic. They have a right to have this information. And now you have Senate Republicans desperately fighting and openly defying this court order to turn over their communications about the ballot audit. Here's what they're looking for. Quote, any and all records with a substantial nexus to the audit are public records, the judge says. This includes all communications related to planning the audit, policies and procedures of the audit, and all records disclosing who is paying for the audit and how much is being spent. That seems pretty innocuous to me, right? I mean, we're not talking about turning over the government's files on Area 51, folks. We're talking about, hey, how is this being paid for and how'd y'all come up with the plan and what's going on with it? That's it. That's literally what these groups are wanting to find out. And the judge says this stuff should be public record. It's supposed to be public record. You got to release it. And Fan says, no, I'm not going to do it. This is private. This, I guess, is personal. This entire audit from the start, as I'm sure everyone watching this understands, this has been a farce. It is absolute political theater. You have had Republicans from other states come in, tour the facility where they were initially doing the ballot audit so they could take the blueprints essentially back to their own states. We also know that Cyber Ninjas, the group conducting the audit, basically broke the voting machines, now costing the voters in Arizona $3 million because, oops, Cyber Ninjas accidentally got a bunch of malware installed in the voting machines. I'm sorry. This is a terrible, terrible threat to our democracy, but it's also kind of hilarious at how incompetent these individuals are. And now, of course, Cyber Ninjas wants to get their hands on the routers, as if that's really going to tell them much of anything. Cybersecurity experts agree that the routers really are going to be, you're not going to get anything on that. You would have had to have done it at the time. After the fact, you're not going to have any data stored there, most likely. So if you wanted that, you should have done it as things were happening so you could have done the captures, which didn't happen. So there's that. Then, of course, and this is all, by the way, in the span of just 2 weeks, a lot of it happening this week. So you've got the Republicans fighting to keep everything secret. They don't want anybody to know what's happening. And gee, I wonder why that is. And then you also have Republicans subpoenaed both Dominion voting systems and Maricopa County officials wanting even more information to hand over to Cyber Ninjas. And the Maricopa County folks said, listen, The stuff you're asking us for, we can't turn it over. One, because we don't even have it. It's not our stuff. You're asking for something that other state entities have, so we can't even do it. But two, if we did have it, we still wouldn't do it because what you're asking for includes social security numbers of our voters. You know, all of this vital private information that, if leaked, could absolutely result in a living nightmare for these individuals. So yeah, we don't have it, so we can't give it to you. But if we did have it, we wouldn't give it to you. We're not complying with this subpoena. We've complied with everything else. You have everything you need from us. Go away at this point is basically what they're saying. And Dominion, came back with similar things. We've given you everything, Dominion says. Anything else you ask for at this point is ridiculous. Just like, by the way, this entire ballot audit is, folks. I have no doubt, and I have said this plenty of times, over on my YouTube channel at Fair and Balanced and at Ring of Fire. If they had found anything at all, anything, a single instance of fraud, they would be coming out, holding press conference saying, ladies and gentlemen, the investigation is ongoing, but I want to highlight this. This case of fraud here that we found that had gone unnoticed, this is why the ballot audit. They haven't done that because they have nothing to do that for. You also, by the way, a member of the Senate's appointed audit team, the leader of it, came out and said, oh, we found 74,000 ballots, mail-out ballots, that we have no record of sending out. And then reporters actually looked at the record and immediately said, actually, there is a record of all of these going out. You're straight up lying to us now. So they're openly lying. They're hiding the information. And there's no signs of this thing going away anytime soon. It's been going on for 5 months. And apparently it is just going to keep on rolling. And while we're on the subject of election fraud, another quick thing I want to hit on real quick here. This week, it was revealed that a DOJ official by the name of Jeffrey Clark, who I believe was in the Civil Rights Division, on December 28th, he drafted a memo that he was going to send to then acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen and then acting Deputy Attorney General Ken Donahue. And the letter said, we're going to tell the state officials in Georgia that their election was riddled with irregularities, and therefore they need to hold a special session of Congress so that they cannot certify the results of the election and figure out how to move forward with this so-called fraudulent election. Jeffrey Clark had the memo ready. He sent it to Rosen and Donahue and said, I've got this ready for all three of us to sign here. And it's worth noting, obviously, that Clark is, an avid Trump loyalist there in the DOJ. And luckily, both Rosen and Donahue looked at this memo and they said, no, we're not doing this. This isn't true. What you're saying here is a lie. The DOJ already looked at Georgia, by the way, and we couldn't find any irregularities. We didn't see anything that raised any red flags. We're not going to sign your stupid little memo. And the reason I wanted to make sure I hit on this story today, folks, is because it does show that even if a coup doesn't work, even if it never gets off the ground, isn't it still a coup nonetheless? When you had members of the Department of Justice, and not just Clark, there were other folks in this too, that were actively trying to overturn a state's election results just to appease Donald Trump. Because this wouldn't have even changed the results of the 2020 election, folks. Wouldn't have changed it. Those electoral votes from Georgia did not put Biden over the top. And thank goodness Rosen and Donahue had enough sense to say, nope, listen, we're not going to destroy democracy for you today. We got to take another break. I'm Farron Cousins, in for David Pakman. This is the David Pakman Show. We'll be right back.
Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time, and plenty of other awesome membership perks, go to joinpacman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Joinpacman.com.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. I am Farron Cousins from Ring of Fire, sitting in for David Pakman today. The Dixie Fire, ravaging out there in the state of California this week, essentially swallowed up an entire town, the town of Greeneville. It was an old mining town, has been around for ages, small population, estimated to be about 1,200, and that fire absolutely incinerated and destroyed the downtown of this area. The Dixie Fire, and of course many homes and all of that, the town is destroyed, much like Paradise was several years ago with that wildfire. And now we have another town that is on the verge of not even existing because of this fire. Dixie Fire has been raging for 3 weeks now. And it is just one of, what are my numbers here? One of 97 wildfires currently in the United States, across 13 different states. We have 97 wildfires right now ravaging the United States, 20,000 active firefighters out there trying to put out the flames. This is climate change. Let's be honest. The heat dome that we saw over the Pacific Northwest earlier this summer, that's climate change. We have such extreme temperatures over on the West Coast, the northern West Coast, that we've literally had billions of sea creatures that have died because of the extreme change in the water temperature. And to make matters worse with the Dixie Fire and other fires, we're having another weather event, strong gusting winds, 30, 40 miles an hour, that is making it difficult for firefighters to be able to get there. And of course, it's making it easier for the fire to spread. And based on the reporting that I've seen, it does appear that this fire, much like the one that destroyed the town of Paradise, was possibly started by faulty equipment from California Energy Company, PG&E. This one, they're saying they believe there was a branch laying on a piece of equipment that could have sparked and then caused the fire. Obviously, it's a little too soon to make bold accusations as to PG&E was definitely at fault for this. First, we got to work on getting the flames out. We've got to conduct the investigations. We've got to figure out what exactly is happening here. So that's what's being reported. Again, can't necessarily make one claim one way or another. But what we do have to acknowledge, the claim we can make, is that extreme events like this, all of these fires, not just the Dixie Fire, this is what climate change looks like. We have watched all through 2021, to be honest with you, as climate change isn't knocking at our door. It's bursting through that door and saying, I am here. Winter Storm Uri in Texas, that was climate change saying, here I am, look at me. The heat dome, here I am. The fires, that of course result from the droughts and the extreme heat. I am here is what climate change is telling us. Now, we have an administration now that understands this. We just went 4 years with an administration that at one point had said that climate change was a hoax by the Chinese. And the Trump administration actively worked to roll back environmental protections, emission reductions, fuel efficiency, all for no other reason than he wanted to undo parts of President Obama's environmental legacy. And Republicans cheered this stuff on. They were happy about it. Oh boy, he's repealing the MAT standard, so there's going to be more mercury in our air. They were happy about these things. But climate change is here. I know I know. The study from 2018 saying we got 12 years till the worst effects of climate change might not just hit us, but might also become the norm. Well, guess what? That was 3 years ago that came out. And we essentially had 3 years at that point, and 2 years prior to that, of backpedaling on the issue of climate change. More emissions, even though we had the pandemic last year, global emissions actually still increased. We're not getting better yet, but we can. There is still time. And with an administration that understands the dangers of this, have they gone as far as I want them to on the issue of climate change? Absolutely not. Like, really not even close to what needs to happen. But at least we're finally moving in the right direction. And you can't be upset about that. We can be frustrated that we're not doing everything that needs to be done yet. And that's why we keep pushing, and that's why we keep fighting. Here's a little bit of silver lining, though. Democrats in the Senate, led, of course, by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, are pushing a draft for the reconciliation package that would include $500 billion that would be collected from fossil fuel companies to pay for the emissions that they spewed out from the years 2000 to 2019. Now, Chuck Schumer, for the record, has stayed mum on whether or not he is going to include this $500 billion fine, essentially, on fossil fuel companies to pay for their emissions. But why not, right? I mean, heck, one of the big issues we're having with this reconciliation bill is, it's very expensive. How are we going to cover the cost? Well, if it's $3.5 trillion, we can pay for that half by putting this provision in there. The fossil fuel companies, as has been widely reported, have known about the dangers of climate change since at least the 1970s. I've actually gone through the documents for some reporting back when I was with Desmog Blog, and actually they do have documents going all the way back to the 1950s where they talk about the fact that we believe that the burning that we're doing of these fuels could possibly be changing the actual atmosphere. It's remarkable, and I know everybody says that they've known since the 1970s, but if you go through those documents, their internal documents, they've actually been concerned about this since the 50s. It was just really confirmed for them in the 70s. So either way, they have known about the dangers of fossil fuel burning. They have known what it does to this planet. And yes, it is time for them to pay us back. Because these emissions that go out there, these extreme weather events that we see as a result of climate change, they cost money. They cost lives. And yet, instead of making these industries pay for it, we're subsidizing them to the tune of, I think, direct cash subsidies is at $14 billion a year at this point. This is nuts. It's time for them to pay up. And this draft that is not yet in the reconciliation bill, but they want to get it in the reconciliation bill, but this draft would absolutely be a great start to get us where we need to be on this issue. And speaking of Democrats pushing much-needed legislation, this week, several Democratic members in the House of Representatives and in the Senate have proposed legislation called the Right to Vote Act. And what the Right to Vote Act, which, let's give credit here, you got Representative Mondaire Jones, Senators John Office and Alex Padilla. They introduced this piece of legislation on Wednesday. What it would do is would ensure that courts respect the right to vote as the fundamental right that it is. It is the first congressional guarantee of the right to vote in federal elections. It also solves the problem that we are seeing in certain states of election subversion. The bill would affirm Americans' right to vote by declaring election laws or rules that pose a severe or discriminatory burden to be illegitimate, unless the jurisdiction in question can prove that its proposed law or rule furthers a governmental interest and is the least restrictive means of doing so. So once again, we have Democrats in the House and in the Senate that are saying we have to do something to protect the right to vote for Americans. You know, what is it? Close to 200 pieces of legislation being worked on across the country. We all know Texas right now is trying to be the latest to pass a massively restrictive voting bill. Georgia's already done it. Florida's already done it. Other states are trying to get it done as well. Federal legislation could circumvent this. Federal legislation could render all of these other pieces dead. Here's the problem. In some of the areas where this legislation has passed, and I'm not saying this would be effective, I'm just saying this is a possibility. You have states that have already passed these restrictive voting bills. If the federal government were to come out with federal legislation basically undoing these state bills, the states would actually have a pretty decent 10th Amendment case to bring against the government. You know, you didn't have a law in place, so we put our own in place, and so ours existed prior to yours. It may not be the strongest legal argument, but I guarantee you we would see it coming out of these states. You know, the states' rights groups would be fighting this tooth and nail. Doesn't mean it would be successful. It just means if something like the Right to Vote Act did end up passing, it would still have a long journey through the U.S. courts before finally becoming law of the land, to be honest, or possibly even being struck down by the United States Supreme Court that, as we all know, has a huge conservative slant right now. But all of that is future talk. And there's a time for future talk, and there's a time to just acknowledge that, yes, Democrats are actually working to do good things for the United States. And sometimes you just got to take a win when you can get a win. And sometimes that win is just the draft legislation, whether it's the Right to Vote Act, whether it's that, $500 billion fine that Sanders and Warren want to levy against fossil fuel companies. A win is a win. Cori Bush, with her protest essentially to extend the eviction moratorium, that worked. We may only get an extra 60 days of an eviction moratorium, but direct action produced a result. And Democrats are not sitting idly by, some of them, because we all know some of them are, but some of them are not sitting idly by in Washington, D.C., watching as Republicans strip voting rights away from constituents because that's the only way they can stay in power. They've admitted that too many times over just the past year for us to not acknowledge that that is why this is happening. Republicans know that the public changes. Demographics shift. People's viewpoints change. Look at polling on issues stripped away from politicians or political parties. And on the issues, America's actually very progressive. That only changes when you attach a political ideology or a specific politician to the policy, by the way. Something to keep in mind when you see these numbers. Americans support these things. Republicans support these things. They support the infrastructure bill. They support action to rein in climate change. They support raising taxes on corporations. The wind is at your back, Democrats. I want to see more of this. Not just because I want you to prove that you can fight, but because I actually have a vested interest as an American in watching everybody's lives get better. I'm Farron Cousins, and for David Pakman, we'll be right back.
If you value what we do at The David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind-the-scenes videos, the daily bonus show, the commercial-free daily show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs, and t-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. I am Farron Cousins, sitting in for David Pakman today. And don't forget, you can follow me on Twitter, in fact, on all social media, at Farron Balanced. You can also get me on youtube.com/Farron Balanced and the big YouTube channel, youtube.com/The Ring of Fire. Well, folks, we've done a good job today so far of not talking about Donald Trump. So let's talk about Donald Trump right now, because there has been some Trump developments this week. The first thing I want to talk about here. There was a piece this week from a good friend of mine at Salon.com, a writer by the name of Chauncey DeVega. A piece titled, "Are Trump's followers being conned? No, they gave him $100 million because they love him." If you have a chance, I encourage everybody to go read this piece because I love it. See, for a long time, many years actually, I have been saying that Trump is conning his supporters. So when I saw this piece, I almost felt like, oh no, I hope I'm not mentioned in it, because I had mentioned were being conned even earlier this week when it was reported that Donald Trump had $100 million. $100 million that he is definitely not using to help his good friend Rudy Giuliani, but that's a story for a different day that David actually covered earlier this week. Either way, Trump's got $100 million. He's raising it from all over the country, people just sending him money. He's spending it at his own properties to a degree. Hundreds of thousands of dollars have been spent at his own properties, which he has 100% interest in some of the properties where it's been spent, so most of it goes right back into his own pocket. So, my logical conclusion is yes, these individuals are being conned, because some of this money, a good chunk of it, was raised under the guise of, we're going to use this, the Trump PACs, we're going to use this to pay for ballot audits, to pay for election challenges. And they spent a whopping $0 on it. So they gave Trump money thinking it was going to one thing, and then it didn't go to that. And I, would come to the conclusion logically, these people are being conned. But Chauncey DeVega actually makes a much better point than I was able to make. And he says, it's not that they're being conned. Sure, they might be being conned, but they also don't care. They would still give the money to him regardless. And there's a great explanation as to why. See, we found out late last year that the Trump campaign was essentially, and the RNC did it, I think, a little bit too. But anyway, they were essentially scamming their supporters and auto-enrolling them in these monthly donations. So somebody thought they're giving a one-time donation. They didn't read the fine print. They didn't go through all the hurdles to turn off the recurring payment. And so they just kept month after month after month. Some people lost, tons and tons of money for this. And even after they turned it off, though, some of them are still giving money to Donald Trump. They said, oh, yeah, it was horrible. We got swindled here. Yeah, we're still going to give him money. And that's just one example that, kind of proves the point that they don't care that they're being conned. And that's a point that DeVega really makes very well in this piece, is that even if the money doesn't go where they think it's going to go, even if they're told one thing and a completely opposite thing happens, they still like him. They still want him to be the president. They still support him. They are still going to give him that money. Now, I had actually mentioned in a segment on my channel, Fair and Balanced, earlier this week, that I've run out of sympathy for these people. I have no more empathy if they go bankrupt giving money to Donald Trump. Sure, I don't want it to happen, but at this point, they've had enough warnings that if it happens, it happens. Because it's worse than being conned. And that's kind of the point that DeVega makes in the piece. That's the big conclusion here, is that it's worse than a con. It's a cult. That's what it is. It doesn't matter what he does to some of these people. And again, I'm not saying all Republicans are in the cult, but you do have this diehard sect of Trump supporters that it is really difficult to describe them as anything else, because it doesn't matter what he says. It doesn't matter what he does. It doesn't matter if he lies to their face about it. Heck, we got reports that he likely didn't donate the last couple months of his salary like he promised to always do, and his kids would always boast about on social media. We also know that GDP growth under Donald Trump, another story came out this week, was the lowest it's ever been since the Great Depression. No president had worse GDP growth than Donald Trump. George W. Bush came close. His was 1.8% over 8 years. Trump's was 1.6% over 4 years. So economically speaking, the guy was really, really bad. But the supporters don't care. They're still clamoring for him. They still want more from him. They still want him to be president again. Probably holding out hope that, what is this, a week from August 13th at this point? Oh my God. You know, if Lindell's original correction was correct, or prediction was correct, we'd be a week away from Trump coming back, and these people would love it. They don't care about the lies. They don't care about the vulgar behavior. They don't care about how he mocked a disabled reporter way back in the day. They don't care about any of it. And they don't care what he uses their money for. They just want to keep giving it to him. And at this point, those individuals, it's likely that they can't be pulled out of this, certainly not by somebody like me. You know, you would need somebody who actually understands that kind of cult mentality and how to actually deprogram people. Which, yes, there are experts in that. And those are the ones who really would have to work on these individuals. But until then, they're going to keep giving until they can't give anymore. They know they're being conned. They just stopped caring. And another person, Trump appointee, out there conning more people this week. An inspector general appointed by Donald Trump came out this week saying that they did a thorough investigation, and it turns out that the PPE problems that America had in the early days of the pandemic, which seems like centuries ago at this point, those PPE issues, it wasn't the fault of the administration or the coronavirus task force that he had put together. No, sirree. It was FEMA. It was all totally FEMA. Homeland Security Inspector General Joseph Cuffari came out and said this: the magnitude of the global event exposed weaknesses in FEMA's resource request system and allocation processes. Specifically, Web EOC, the system FEMA used to process PPE and ventilator resource requests, contained unreliable data to inform allocation decisions and ensure requests were accurately adjudicated. In addition, although FEMA developed a process to allocate the limited supply of ventilators, it did not have a similar process for PPE. There it is, folks. Case closed, according to Mr. Cuffari. FEMA's to blame for how horrible things were in the early days of the pandemic. What I love about this is that this is complete history erasure. We remember how things worked at that time. You had Jared Kushner in charge of PPE, and that didn't work out so well. You had PPE that was being taken from some hospitals, put over in these other places where Trump and his little coronavirus task force would then decide how to allocate it. They were taking things from FEMA, not letting FEMA do what they were supposed to. We all know that. Those reports were everywhere. This is just mind-blowing. And sometimes you get a story like this that just shakes you to your core because you know how false it is, because, folks, we all lived through this. I know I said it feels like centuries ago, but I'm hoping the more I say these things, it jogs your memory and everybody's like, oh, wait, yeah, I do remember that. This was crazy times. It was the wild, wild west of PPE with our own government acting as the bandits, taking it from these places and reallocating it based on where they felt it needed to go. For example, in the early days of the pandemic, New York was getting hit harder than anybody. Florida was actually doing pretty well. And this was, March, April 2020, folks. But still, they were sending all this PPE, all these ventilators down to the state of Florida, and we had more than we could ever need down here. Meanwhile, New York was having to put people in hospital beds in parking garages without ventilators because they just had nothing and they were getting nothing. And the difference is obviously New York had a Democratic governor. Florida had a Trump-loving Republican governor. It's really not that hard to put the pieces together. And yet here you have this report from Kufari coming out and saying, nope, coronavirus task force, they did everything right. FEMA screwed up because their computer systems were stupid. Now, I'm not trying to absolve FEMA of any, any problems that they had during the pandemic, because sure, they had plenty. Everybody had plenty. We weren't prepared for this. We had been cutting pandemic funding. We had been cutting preparedness. The Trump administration completely ignored a response plan that the Obama administration had put in place. We had some protocols, certainly not even enough, but we didn't even follow those. So it is what it is. COVID ran rampant, still is rampant, is mutating at an alarming rate at this point. We're now getting reports out this week that the Lambda variant, and I think whichever one is after that, the other variant they mentioned, they think those might actually be vaccine resistant. And if that is the case, we're back to square one, folks. We would be back to lockdowns. We would be back to stay-at-home orders, mask mandates, all of that from the beginning, because our vaccines would be useless against new variants. It is what it is. We've elected crazily incompetent people, and we're reaping the repercussions of that. And it's terrifying. And yes, it's unfair to the people who didn't vote for all of these incompetent buffoons. But nevertheless, every election can have nationwide consequences. You may not live in Florida. You may not have had the chance to vote against Ron DeSantis like I did. But his idiotic decisions, letting COVID run rampant here, are still going to affect you where you are, because the more we have it here, the more it mutates, the more it travels. Same thing with Abbott over in Texas. Same thing with Hutchinson in Arkansas, and Ivy in Alabama, and all of these other southern states where it's blowing up. It's going to make it back to the blue states. It's going to make it to the West Coast. It's going to make it to the, Midwest. All of these decisions from all of these politicians, big and small, local and national, they all affect each and every one of us. FEMA screwed up in the beginning. The White House Coronavirus Task Force screwed up even worse than that. Trump screwed up. Governors screwed up. Democratic and Republican governors hid COVID data. Cuomo and DeSantis, I'm looking at you both. And we're still stuck in it. And as I mentioned, we may be back to square one really soon. But hey, I appreciate you tuning in today, and I appreciate David Pakman and everybody else at the David Pakman Show for letting me fill in. Again, I am Farron Cousins. You can get me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at Farron Balanced, youtube.com/The Ring of Fire, and my personal YouTube, youtube.com/Farron Balanced. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for today's bonus show.
Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.